Well, hey, everybody. Thanks for coming. It is God's Comic Brad Stein. This is Brad Stein Has Issues, where comedy, Christianity, and conservatism collide in a cacophony of clarity. This is a very special Monday night. It is December 1st. December is here. 2025 is heading out. And we need to head out with as much truth as possible. What do I mean by that? Well, we have a very unique guest on. This is somebody that I got to tell you, when I interviewed them, it was just interesting and striking and just kind of jaw-dropping. But guess what? His name is Chatto Jackson, and he has done an entire documentary about Martin Luther King and how Martin Luther King was, in fact, his assessment, a communist. Wasn't even really doing traditional Christian beliefs. So that was fascinating to me, because it's kind of like, wait a minute, Martin Luther King is an icon. He is the guy. He is the man that represented the civil rights movement. He's the man that used Christianity to help instigate the civil rights movement, and now you're telling me he wasn't even a Christian, he was actually a communist? This was hard to grasp, but it's a complete documentary. You can listen to everything he said, all the interviews and so forth, so you will find this to be a very interesting conversation, I guarantee you. Now, if you are showing up to Brad Stein Has Issues for the first time, I am a professional comedian, but it has literally morphed my entire career into a ministry. I believe that God has called me to be a prophetic voice to the church. Prophetic voice simply meaning speaking about things that are necessary, where we're at in the nation, and where to go. And that is about becoming disciples. Simply being disciples simply means you want to go to the deepest levels of your faith. You want to go super deep. You want to go super, you want to study. You want to understand what you believe. You want to understand your faith. You want to be able to explain your faith to people. Should be an expectation of being a believer. And I don't think that it is something that has been expected from Christians in America over the years. So I just wanted to tell you that I got back from one of the longer tours I have ever done. I was in a little tour. I was in Danville, Indiana. I was in Memphis, Indiana. I was in, Ellingsworth, Illinois. I was in Plymouth, Indiana, which is actually the town, the hospital in Plymouth, Indiana is where I was born, though I lived in Bremen, Indiana, a very tiny town in northern Indiana. But so I did the Reese Theater, a beautiful little theater, just small little thing, but old-fashioned, and I got to perform there, had some family who came out and saw me there. So lots of fun, numerous shows, and then just finished a last two shows as I was coming home in Kentucky. So that was a lot of fun doing that. The last show, by the way, was for a Teen Challenge. So I was in a Teen Challenge recovery area where people were getting off of drugs and addiction of some kind and learning the gospel and getting close to Christ. So that was exciting. They were a great crowd. And it was just, I tried to share my heart and what has happened to me in my life and what I'm trying to do and what I've tried to do with my faith. And it's exciting to work with people that are trying to get on the other side of, addiction and difficulty. So that was a lot of fun. And listen, if you go to my website, they've all vanished. I brought up my phone because I thought, well, hey, I can give people the exact names of every place because I don't memorize them, believe it or not. And it vanishes on my tour page. As each one is done, it kind of disappears and heads towards the next ones. But anyways, it was something I was excited to do, and hopefully, if you think about bringing me into your area, keep in mind that I don't just do laughs, but I do try to bring sometimes fundraisers, but inspiration. I really care about faith in general and about my faith in Christ and what that means to me. I got to tell you something. As I said today, the guy that we're interviewing, Chatto Jackson, he really started taking apart Martin Luther King. Now, this is challenging, to say the least, because Martin Luther King is an icon in the United States, obviously. Well, that's not true. He's an icon around the world. And he has always been thought of as a civil rights champion and certainly was involved in the civil rights movement in the United States. And, you know, it made me think about something. There was parts of things that actually, I think even in some FBI files that came out a while ago, things came up about him that were very not good. They were not the types of things that you would want to associate with a guy that you really felt was an honorable, virtuous man. He was a pastor. He was a Christian. He used Christian words and terms from the letters from the Birmingham jail and from different things like that. So you clearly wanted to depend on him. And here he was doing civil rights work. So that tells me, you know, he said that no law, you know, an unjust law is no law at all, and he believed that he should be able to use our faith to defend equality in America. But I think what I really wanted to explore more today was the idea of, I guess, making heroes out of people. You know, I heard somebody tell me once when I was at the Teen Challenge event. A lot of folks came up to me afterwards and, you know, they enjoyed it and they thanked me for helping them and you know, inspiring them, encouraging them. That was what I wanted to do. And a guy came up to me and he said something interesting. He talked about the pastor who brought me in, and it's a great little church. It started out with 10 people. They got 50 now, and it's I'm talking about the middle of nowhere, Kentucky. I mean, it is backwoods. It is snake handling vicinity. And it was great because this man had actually graduated from the Teen Challenge program. So he too was a drug addict and suddenly found himself being set free by Christ, and then starting you know, he's married. I don't know if he was married at the time that he was an addict. I'm not sure. Didn't really go into that, but he did graduate. He's married. He's got a family, and he's a believer, and he's a pastor now. And so this one guy came up to me, and he said, I go to this man's church now. I had really been done wrong by the church, and so I wasn't even sure if I was going to go back to churches anymore. And I was driving by this guy's church, and I kind of prayed, should I go here? And I was going a little bit, and I finally kind of like slammed on the brakes, and I turned around, I went in there, and the guys in the church had somehow seen him drive past. I'm not sure what happened, but they saw him, and they literally said that they were going to pray for him, you know, just pray for him. God told him to pray for him. And the guy ends up coming into the church about halfway through the service. He sits down. He's gone ever since. But the thing so that's beautiful, because that's a mysterious spiritual thing that took place that is one of the moments that God can and does sometimes give us to show that he really does work in real time out there in helping us to know that he's real, that he's part of our life, he's part of who we are as human beings. He loves us, he created us, we're made in his image, and he does want us to pray and partner with him and do these things. But here's the thing. I said something to him, and I just, you know, I guess I'm throwing this out to anybody else out there that might be watching this or thinking about this, or maybe this will go out as a clip. You cannot, don't blame Jesus for how you were treated in a church. Don't blame Jesus for how you were treated by a Christian. Don't blame Jesus by how you were treated, if it was badly, by someone using a Bible verse or claiming to be a Christian. Christianity is a follower of Jesus. The original group called themselves followers of the way. That's who they were. And so we're following Jesus. In other words, to follow somebody means you're behind them. You're trying to catch up. I made a joke about it, I think, years ago. It's like, I'm just a follower. He's way up there. I'm just trying to catch up. And half the time I'm stopping, catching my breath, keep going, Lord. I'm just going to backslide a second. I'll be right there. So, making a joke about to follow means to try to constantly stay up, to stay in step, to catch him and to be like him, because that's what we're told to be like Christ, to become Christ-like. Well, here's the thing. We never get there. We are sinners. Christ was the only sinless guy. He was the God-man. We are sinners. We are failures. I said this, I think, I don't remember if I said it in an interview maybe, but and I don't even know if I've ever said it in a show, but here's the thing. When you go see Christians, when you engage with them, you are going to see hypocrites. You are going to see sinners. You are going to see evil, maybe. You're going to see gossip and backbiting, the very things that you think you're supposed to overcome as a Christian so that you can look in Christians and say, that's what I want. I want to be like those guys. That's what we're shooting for. That's what we want to be. But the problem is we're not ever going to nail it. We're going to fail. And so this is an interesting way to think about Christians, okay? Or Christianity, I guess would be a better way to say it. When you see a Christian and you want them to act a certain way and you're hoping that they can show you that they are these moral, ethical people that you want to emulate and whatever, when you see that, I want you to keep in mind that when they betray you, or if they do, when they sin or fall, or are, the biggest word, hypocrites. I don't like you Christians, you're all hypocrites. And here's the interesting answer. We are. Christians are hypocrites. By our very nature, based on what Christianity teaches us, to become conformed to the image of Christ, to be like Jesus. Yeah, we're hypocrites by our nature. We don't always behave the way we say we want to. We don't always act in the way that we think we're supposed to. We don't always do the things we believe that God has called us to do. That's true. And instead of looking at that like, see, Christianity fails, Christians fail, the church fails, you need to see it as something else. See it as proof that Christianity is true, because here's the thing about Christianity. It teaches everyone this is exactly what's going to be representing the church. Failed, hypocritical, sometimes judgmental, sometimes horribly sinful, bad people who will have to represent the church, because we came to the church to get saved, to get born again, to get set free spiritually from our failed life, so that God could redeem us and bring us to the Father pure. Only because of what Christ did. He does everything unhypocritical. He does everything perfectly. He does everything exactly how we're supposed to do it, because we're followers of Christ. We're trying to be like him. So that's the one you need to follow. When you are offended by a Christian, when you feel let down by a Christian, when you feel let down by the church, maybe the church didn't defend you or protect you or act in a way that you think they should have, or they did something devious. I mean, these are filled with sinful people. Don't blame Jesus for what his followers do. Don't blame the church in general, which is representing Christ, and the Bible, which was representing the truth and who we are and where we're supposed to go as humans. Don't blame it for our failures as a representative of Christ. Always go to the source. Whenever you want to know about Christ, go to him. Get a Bible. Read the Gospels. They will tell you who Jesus was, what he talked about, what he was like. Those 4 Gospels are our best and only really witnesses of Jesus on earth as he was behaving in real time. So that's your representation. That's where you have to find your solace, your hope, your dreams, your forgiveness, your perfection. Go to the source, not to those who are trying to do what you're doing, trying to get to Jesus, trying to be like Jesus, trying to emulate Jesus, trying to become Jesus. We aren't there yet. That's the point. So we can't be your representatives. We can't be the one that you are looking to be the standard by which you can look at and say, yes, so-and-so is like that. I want to be like them. Now, you can be inspired. There are wonderful Christian folks that their lives are amazing and inspiring, and they should do that to you. Yeah, they're there too. But Jesus is the standard. Always go back to him. If you see somebody acting like a hypocrite, go look and see, did Jesus do that? Did Jesus act like that? Did Jesus behave in that way? And if not, that's your standard. That's what these guys that have failed, that's why you can tell the difference between the church and the Christians and Christ. We're the failures. We're the ones that will do it wrong. But hopefully we'll admit it. My bad. Please forgive me. I failed. I didn't represent Christ properly. I feel horrible for that. And true believers want to serve God. We do. And so we feel terrible when we don't live up to the thing that we want to be. We want to be someone that you can look at and say, I want to be like him. We want to show you that this truth is true, and you can see it in our lives. But we're not going to get there. And so I guess I was piggybacking off of this whole interview today on Martin Luther King, because we're going to look at him as somebody that we've emulated. There's a giant statue of him in Washington, D.C. I don't know if there's a city in the big city in the United States that doesn't have a Martin Luther King avenue or boulevard. So this is somebody who has been considered, and his I Have a Dream speech, which comes up in the interview, by the way, as to who wrote this. I didn't understand that this wasn't written, or at least completely written by him. But this famous phrase in that speech, I look forward to a day when my children are judged by are not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. A beautiful phrase that has been repeated for decades now, because it was such a beautiful way to frame it. We should, and this is what Christianity teaches, by the way, judge people by who they are on the inside, by their spirit. That's what's real. That's what's redeemed. That's what God said is made in his image. He made us in the image of himself through the Spirit. And that's who we are, not our skin, not our suit. That's going to come and go. And so that's something that I want you guys to keep in mind as you listen to this interview, how disappointed we will be with people. I mean, there's not a person in your life that you don't love, that you haven't been in any relationship with, that hasn't failed you, hasn't let you down. They don't exist. And so I want you guys to understand that don't let this conversation destroy your hope in humanity, or that there aren't people that you can look up to. There's wonderful heroes in this earth and people that have done good things. Even people who've done terrible things can still have some positive attributes and so forth, like us. Right? If you've known you failed and somebody comes to you and says, I want to look to you, you're going, oh, don't look at me. I know what I'm like. But you've also done good things and important things and positive things. So that's another thing that I want you guys to keep in mind, that this shouldn't be something that deflates your belief in humanity, but just let you know we're all in the same boat, fallen creatures trying to represent Christ, if we're a Christian, well. Well, folks, I want you to also know something too. I have tried to figure out, what my purpose is on this earth, and so I'm gonna take a moment to have a personal talk with you guys who are watching, especially those who watch from the beginning because you've been the oldest, most dearest fans. But also to those who watch later. Most of the views and listenings happen afterwards when Wyatt uploads them to the Salem network on Tuesdays, and then they're on Spotify and iTunes. But a lot of people watch on Brad Stein Has Issues, the YouTube channel. But I've always tried to be very honest. I've always tried to be very real with you guys about what I'm doing. When I started out, I was a comic. I was just trying to be funny. I was hoping I could do that and I was a Christian, so I was trying to represent Christ well. I didn't curse and sex jokes or whatever. But I was working in the clubs and doing the hardest places. Well, so then, as God pulled me into the church and then it became a ministry, I really began to find that the inspirational moments, the things that I wanted to do to inspire the church, became more important to me and even in some ways more advanced than the comedy. But my wife said something 2 nights ago at the church, the Teen Challenge event. She said, you know, I really have seen how important the comedy is because these guys, and they're, you know, former addicts, they're trying to get through it and trying to come out the other side. They laughed their heads off. It was such a great audience. And what she was saying was, you know, this comedy really helps them overcome, and it gives them hope and joy, and there's something beautiful about comedy that the world needs, and it's important, and I'm glad that it exists, and that I think I can see it as part of your ministry and how important it actually is. And again, I started out as a stand-up comic, and then when I began to incorporate Christian elements and ideas into it, it just shaped the way my comedy was, and everything became a theme. You know, here's the funny, but here's what I was really trying to say. Here's something humorous, but I really had a deeper meaning. And that's when I realized that I was called to the church, what I would call a prophetic voice, meaning not a pastor, not somebody who's going to be there every week guiding you through things, but a prophetic voice is somebody that says hard things, really reignites an ember, reignites what it means to be a believer, and drives you, hopefully, to become a disciple, because we weren't called to be Christians. We were called to be disciples. So that's really where I've gone with this. And the more I do it, the more I find myself wanting to be more of the inspirational guy, even though people bring me in to perform for them. And you know, they want mainly comedy. But you know what? I got to say, most of the churches that bring me in, they know what I'm doing, and this is what they want. They want somebody that's unapologetic, that's bold about his faith, his witness, and bold about our you know, Christ, and that he's the answer. And even when I speak about America, you know, if you watch my shows from years ago and now, it's really changed. I see America as something to defend and something to try to redeem by a third great awakening. But it is not equal to my faith. America is the place I was born. So yeah, I'm responsible for America as far as influencing and trying to bring it back to Christ and because the church is going to have to do the work and make the moral stand for this nation if it's going to survive. It's not going to come through the political realm. They're all so corrupt. They're all so not caring about it. It's a big game that never ends. This guy gets zinged. This guy gets indicted. Nobody gets ever hauled off to jail. Justice is never served. So you just realize there's really no answer there. It's all a facade. The church is the answer. It gives the moral clarity and it doesn't compromise. So I find myself more and more just wanting to inspire the church and inspire church goers and so forth. And so my strength, my gift that God gave me is talking and thinking. That's what I'm gifted at. I think of things and find funny ways to talk about them. I take maybe hard ideas and I laymanize them. Even in my comedy, I try to take subjects that are, you know, personal pronouns and identifying and all this, that, and, you know, things like that, and find funny in it instead of just kind of trying to attack people. Find a funny way of dealing with something that is important to talk about. So that's been my calling. And it's what I'm good at. And I don't say that because bragging. I'm saying that's the gift God gave me, and it's what he wanted me to use, and especially in the church, to try to drive the followers to a deeper place. So that being said, the enemy doesn't like me. The enemy is a roaring lion, going about to and fro, seeking to steal, kill, and destroy, and trying to silence me. He doesn't want me to be able to speak, and he doesn't want me to be able to think, and he doesn't want me to be able to influence people to deeper relationships. Because, you know, I got to say, he's more concerned about me bringing an entire church to a deeper relationship in their faith than he is worried about me getting one guy saved. Because one guy saved still has a long journey to go, where he gets to find out he's a hypocrite and all the things because he doesn't know where he's going. He's just a brand new Christian. But those who are those who have already tried to live the life, to go deeper makes them really dangerous. Because now we're sending out an entire army into the atmosphere to affect neighbors and friends and employees and employers and husbands and wives and children and governments and school boards and everything, because the church walks out after it was inspired and brings the word into the atmosphere and the marketplace, into the city where you live in. That's your Nineveh, where you are assigned. So that's more dangerous. So that being said, I want you to pray for me. I've got some physical issues that have been occurring. I want you to pray for God to heal them, to help me overcome them. I'm going to try to get some more information on it down the road, and I'll fill you in on it as it happens. My hope is that, of course, we're going to see an incredible breakthrough and healing and helpfulness. But I have given my life to Christ. And when I did, that means hook, line, and sinker. Whatever he asks of me, I will do. Whatever he tells me to go say, I will say. Wherever he tells me to go work, I will work. And I will do everything I can to honor his call on my life and to encourage you guys to go do your call in your life. But my future is God's. Where I'm going, how long I live, how long I perform, how long, whatever that is, I've given it to the living God. It's his to do as he pleases. And that's the big thing about life, guys. I was thinking about this the other day. We're all heading to the end, right? I mean, I've said this before. Everybody's terminally ill. And something that really hit me, I only get one shot to die. I get one chance to move towards that end. If you're given a chance to know, if you get in a car crash, I mean, it's boom, you're gone, or have a heart attack, that's it, you're out. But if you have a chance to see that, if you were terminally ill with cancer or something, where you know the end's coming and you kind of know when it's coming. Most people don't know when their end's coming. That's the thing. Somebody gets a terminal disease and they're heading to the other end. Meanwhile, every day somebody dies in a car wreck before those people get to the end, and they didn't know they were going. So we're all heading to the end, one way or the other. But if you have a knowledge that things are you're being attacked, then you have more of a chance to contemplate. Okay, where are we going? What are we doing? What do you have going, God? What do you have for me? What is the ultimate conclusion? You get one shot though to die, and so I want to, as I walk my life, and as God continues to take me where he wants me in his own way, I want to do it with honor. I want him to be honored. I want God I want you to look at my life and be inspired. I hope that you can say, this man wasn't perfect, but he did serve Christ the best he could, and he did try it, and he didn't give up, and he didn't quit, and he didn't walk away from it. He made sure that you understood that this is real. It's what I have devoted my life to. It's what my faith has been given. And I'm going to go to my end believing that he's on the other side of the mist. That's who I have given my life to since I was 9. I've gotten deeper and closer and even more amazingly breakthroughs in my spiritual walk in the last even couple years. This many years of my life, and I just picked up on things I wish I knew when I was 30. Didn't work that way. It took me a long time to get where I am. But That being said, pray for me, and I will keep you updated if anything needs to be. And that way we can take the journey together to see what God has for me. And no matter where we go or what we do, it will be to lift up the living God and the God man, Jesus Christ, and the Heavenly Father, who I will in trembling stand before one day with whatever few crowns maybe I earned to say to him, thank you. Thank you for Jesus. And thank you, Holy Spirit, for your comfort. This is what it means to be a believer. This is where the rubber meets the road, folks, is what do you do when your chapter is written? So, that being said, let's look to Christ as our answer and our example. Let's listen to people, try to be inspired, pray for, help other people along the line, but let's not worship. Let's not put people on a pedestal they don't deserve, because they will let you down. And so that being said, this next guest has a documentary that we will have a link to, so you can go watch it. It's free, I believe, on YouTube, but it's pretty astonishing. It's stuff you probably haven't heard about somebody who's legendary and iconic. And so I think you'll find this to be a fascinating conversation, an enlightening one, and I hope it's something that allows you guys to say, pray for those who you care about, pray for those who are trying to get the word out because they need help, they're being attacked, and don't put your faith in people. Put it in God and in the truths that he's given to us in his word. That we can count on. That will never be a hypocrite. That is the truth that is immutable and has been 2,000 years and going for as many generations are willing to pick up that Bible and say, yes, Father, I'm all in. So enjoy your time with this interesting, provocative, enlightening conversation about Martin Luther King, angles you never knew, with me, God's Comic Bradstein, and Chad O. Jackson.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I can't think of someone I would rather have. This is going to be a very fascinating conversation, and I'm sure a little unnerving for some folks in their equilibrium, because it's referencing an icon in a different light, and it's going to just be odd, and probably specifically coming from you, it's going to seem a bit of a dichotomy. But I want to preface it before we start with a little anecdote. So I'm a comic, and when I came out as a Christian and a conservative comic, it destroyed my mainstream career, but it opened up a world for me of people who appreciated their point of view being dignified as a comic and so forth. Big proponent of free speech, big proponent of truth and reality, and using that as my social commentary. So many years ago, I did a joke, and I was talking about Lance Armstrong. And the whole joke was about how the France, he kept winning the Tour de France, and unprecedented. And I kept making jokes about the French keep testing this guy over and over, and they can't find anything. They keep they find extensive amounts of testosterone, but we have been testing French men for years. We've never found any testosterone. So it's a whole joke about the fact that they were sore losers. They were French. It was easy to caricature, broad brush them, of course, because it's comedy, and I'm an American. Well, come to find out, Lance Armstrong was a cheat. So I was made to look like a fool, frankly. I trusted his brand. I trusted his status. I trusted his iconic status at that point. I trusted his perspective when he was being disparaged, that somebody had some agenda. And so when something like that falls, when you put somebody in a position of icon, I don't know what else to say, it's really unnerving when they not only fail, because as Christians, we know people fail. We're all believing in that we're intrinsically sinners. But it's really, really difficult to find your equilibrium when it's somebody that has reached a status that is a little bit beyond typical icon status. And certainly, I don't know of anybody in our culture, certainly in the last 50 or 60 years, that would fit that category more than Martin Luther King.
Right.
And you have put out this amazing video segments. I don't know if they're all out yet, but they're called the MLK Project. And in it, you reevaluate his legacy and maybe his character. So, I mean, I don't want to preface it. I want to let you to kind of launch it, but I think we probably should start with, what in the world provoked you to say there's something here that I need to explore that I don't think I've been aware of all my life. What even launched this whole concept for you?
That's a great question and a very awesome analogy. I think I might reference that in future talks, and I'll reference your name too. But it's interesting because this is actually a journey that I've been on for the past 10 years or so. And having grown up in Mansfield, Texas, which is interesting, we were told growing up that Mansfield was the very last school district to desegregate here in Texas. And there was a big situation about it. There was a big ordeal where Mansfield actually went toe to toe with the feds and not allowing the federal government to impose itself on our local government there in Mansfield. And by the 1990s, because I was actually born in 1990, I'm assuming that the school district, the administrators, overcorrected because they really went all out when it came to Black History Month, when it came to basically plastering the faces of Black figures up and down the hallways at our schools, really kind of leaning in and embracing Black history and all of its heroes. And so we were taught of the glories of Martin Luther King, that he did great things, that he brought the races together, and that without him, we would still be living in Jim Crow. And that was pretty much the narrative that I grew up believing until I heard Dr. Vodi Bakum, the late Dr. Vodi Bakum, say something that really kind of rocked my world. And this would have been maybe 2016, 2017, somewhere thereabout. He basically said that Martin Luther King was a socialist. And I said, wait, not Martin Luther King. Right. He's a great unifier.
Yeah.
But he said it with authority. And by that time, Vodi Bakum had already earned my respect. And so for me, it was worth looking into. And sure enough, I looked into it. And here we are 10 years later. And I'm making a docuseries. We're halfway through season 1. We've released 4 episodes so far that really kind of flesh out and lay out the fact that Martin Luther King wasn't who we thought he was. And, the whole point of it is not to get people to hate Martin Luther King or anything like that, but rather, we are told in the Bible to not be taken captive by hollow and deceptive philosophies that, depend on the elemental spirits of this world and human thinking, but by Christ. And so, what King gives us, what his legacy gives us, is this hollow and deceptive philosophy, because he himself believed in Marxism. And what's interesting about him is that he was deceptive, but the vehicle that he chose to drive in his deception was that of the clergy, that of a Christian pastor. And so he deceived the country, he deceived the world, and he deceived the church. And it's interesting because when you look at the state of the so-called Black church prior to the civil rights movement, you had a lot of pastors who actually preached the gospel with authority and with passion, wanting to see persons come to know Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of their sins, yes, but also for a new life. And not only that, you saw the kind of upscaling, if you will, in terms of family formation amongst Blacks, home ownership, literacy. All of it was moving in the right direction. You can look at my work to see that. You can look at the work of Thomas Sowell to see evidence of that, that of the late Walter Williams and others, where you had black families moving in the right direction. I believe that the marriage rate among blacks was 75% prior to the civil rights movement. And then you have Dr. King come along and his contingent, and they're singing "We Shall Overcome," and what they're doing is very sinister, because they are, in a sense, using the pulpit to push a message that sounds Christian, but underneath it is anything but Christian. It's actually quite Marxist. And what he's doing is he's deviating. It's a departure from the teachings of people like Booker T. Washington, who said, "Cast down your bucket where you are." Irrespective of where you are in this country or in this world, it's incumbent upon you to be a man, to follow the Lord, to make use of what you have, to lean into your skills and your talents. And to the extent that you make something, that you're doing something that no one else is doing, you'll begin to incrementally break down whatever those barriers are, be they race barriers, age barriers, whatever the case is. And what Booker T. Washington set forth was actually materializing and bringing about fruit, because the Bible says good tree possesses good fruit, bad tree possesses bad fruit. It was actually yielding good fruit. And by the time King comes along, it's a kind of departure from what Washington was saying. King is saying things like, the only way for the Negro to be free is by undergoing a radical redistribution of economic power. He said that. He also said things that social justice is the absolute guarantor to riot prevention. It's the only way to prevent riots is by ushering in social justice. Well, social justice is rooted in Marxism.
Yeah.
He's saying things that, he's talking about a universal basic income. I mean, again, these are all socialist Marxist ideas.
Yeah.
And they are, in a sense, the result that it has is a kind of embittering effect on the Black community, to where we took our hands off the proverbial plow and believed that the government's going to do something for us. And as a result of this, all those numbers that were trending in the right direction began to plummet, and got us to where we are today. And so what we have is this idea or this perception of improved race relations, but it's actually not improved at all. What you have is a lot of Blacks who are, and I say this not to be provocative, I say it because it's true. You have a lot of Blacks today, unfortunately, who have this kind of smug disposition, this kind of sense of entitlement, this kind of race paranoia, seeing racism where there is no racism.
Yeah.
You have that on the one hand. And then on the other hand, you have a lot of white folks walking on eggshells around Blacks, not wanting to say the wrong thing because they're afraid they might offend. You have this kind of white liberal sickness where many whites believe that it's incumbent upon them to lay themselves bare before Blacks and to get the government to pass all these socialist policies, because it's the only way that the Negro can care for himself is if the government does something for them. And so if you want to call that improved, okay. And that's not to say that there aren't real, genuine relationships between Blacks and whites. There are. But this kind of government gifted unification that we praise King for, I think is quite laughable. It's not improved at all in that respect.
Well, and there's so many things to kind of dissect with what you just said, because clearly I want to focus on this MLK information, because that's what's going to be kind of revelatory for so many people that are watching this or listening to this. But I also feel like if we can find other pieces of this puzzle in the big picture, maybe we can be of assistance to those who are trying to find some unity and return, or at least hope that we're trying to be a country that is trying to judge people on the content of their character. Irony of ironies. It's funny you said so. I just wanted to show you something. This is what I'm wearing in my
nice.
and
it's a nice color too,
isn't it? But
yeah.
Here, the reason I bring that up is, and I'm just, again, the bulk of this is going to be about your discoveries of MLK and just trying to navigate that, because it is going to be a little unsettling for some folks, but important. If it's true, it's true. Everybody says we want to talk, let's not, revise history. Let's not censor. Okay, well, you might want to buckle up then, because there might be some parts of history that suddenly you're going to have to grapple with, and that's going to be rough, because you've been comfortable, and I'm not talking about Blacks in particular, I'm talking about Americans. You've been comfortable too long. There's too much at stake now in this country. There's too much at stake for freedom. There's too much at stake for us to even be continually seeking whatever the dream was that was America. If we don't find the unity that is the truth and the undergirding presupposition of what it meant to be America, what does it really mean and how do we get there, or can we? But it's funny because I mean, I grew up a baseball fan and I was a Dodger fan. My father was, so you get your sports passed on, right? And so forth and so on. And so one of the things that I was very proud of was the Dodgers because of Jackie Robinson. And I mean, what a wonderful moment that was. It was an important historic moment. And all my favorite players when I was a little kid was like Dodger players. It'd be Morty Wills. It would be Willie Davis. I liked Hank Aaron. I was like, my point, Roberto Clemente, Joe Morgan. I like the short guys because I'm short that could still hit hard. And I'm like, oh, and I never stopped and analyzed, hey, wait a minute. No, wait a minute. These are black guys. So you might want to read. I didn't give a crap. I just like good players in a game that I loved. And what's interesting is if you start with tabula rasa, if you just assume that people are evaluating everybody on a meritocracy, it weeds out itself. You find, it's like the market will reveal itself. You'll go where the success is. You'll walk away from the failures. But there's a lot of money to be made in creating consumers of victimhood.
Yeah, that's right.
There's a lot of money to be creating these buyers of your goods. And so when I first thought of Martin Luther King, of course, and I'm old enough, I'm a baby boomer, to remember him being assassinated, as well as Kennedy. I was I mean, John F. Kennedy, well, let alone Robert. But I was very tiny then. I was 3 years old. But I remember Martin Luther King, and people thinking, this is a terrible thing. One thing that was helpful with media and technology was with television. Technology is a double-edged sword, but one of the great important things was when people could see people being shot with water hoses and being dogs turned on, any normal human's going, what the heck? Yeah. What are you doing? This is terrible. If you never see it, it's easy to kind of whistle past the graveyard or turn up the music while the trains are going to Auschwitz. It's easy to find a way out when you don't have to engage it. And the civil rights movement demanded you engaged it. You have to see this now. And certainly he was the icon. But then you also had Malcolm X. You had this other version of the civil rights movement that seemed to be in conflict, oddly. You'd think, well, we better find some unity. Well, you'd think we're both going to the same direction. Yeah. So here comes MLK. So I guess I don't want to presume that I have the best way to navigate your research, but perhaps you could help us who are hearing this for the first time kind of decide, okay, so let's start with the anointing. What got him into the position that he got in? I visited Ebenezer Baptist Church. I did a series with my friend Rick Green, a Texan who does Patriot Academy, on Martin Luther King. Was he a Marxist? It was called Chasing America's Legends. We were saying, no, he was a good guy. We interviewed Alveda King in Ebenezer Baptist Church, his niece. So, and we discovered, well, he was at some meetings, but he didn't really, it wasn't his thing. It was just, and they were disparaging him, and maybe it was Photoshop, blah, 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 because we couldn't grasp. Yeah. This can't be real. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going too long for this, for prefacing you, but can you start with sort of letting us know, how did he get into the game? What gave him his status? And did it start virtuously? I mean, he was onto something. I want to help my people be given the same access as everybody else. Okay, so let's start there. How did he prime this pump to get the ball rolling?
It's actually an interesting story. And by the way, you could have gone as long as you want. I'm actually very intrigued with what you were saying. Oh, it seems like you already know quite a bit, which is fascinating, because very rarely do you come across people who actually know a lot about this subject, which I think is an important subject. But I have all 7 volumes of the King papers on my shelf, and also access to other King papers, as well as the some of the documents from many of those who were close to King. Ben Kamen just wrote a book not too long ago called Dangerous Friendship, which documented the friendship between Stanley Levison and Martin King. Stanley Levison was the financier of the Communist Party in the 1950s and 60s, as well as a number of communist front groups across New York. He was a very learned man. He had 2 law degrees and a communist strategist at that. And he was King's mentor. He was basically the person who put a number of figures around King that made him larger than life. And not only that, he was also in with the press. And so he would basically mobilize the press to show up to the demonstrations that King was doing, tell them when they would be there, all the things. And all this was happening at a time where television was emerging as the preeminent kind of mode of communication. And so you brought up the point of the dogs and the hoses and all the things. And people don't know that this was a common way of dispersing crowds dating as far back as the 1920s and probably even before that. The problem is that television wasn't as active in those days. And so when you look at the footage, which I have, and I have it here on my hard drive, hours of it, footage from the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, including the 60s, of all white crowds being dispersed with dogs and hoses, because again, it's a common way of dispersing crowds.
You mean in general, or mainly Alabama where this was happening, or you're saying throughout the whole country?
Throughout the whole country. That was a common way to disperse crowds, particularly when those crowds didn't pull the proper permits to demonstrate. Now in this country, you do have the freedom of speech and the freedom to demonstrate and to do all the things. However, we're also a country of law and order. And so you can do your demonstration. You just have to go through the proper channels, pull the permits, because you still have to control for the noise and the traffic and all the things. We have to make sure that we do this in as safe a manner as possible. But what the communists would do was interesting, because they would claim to be nonviolent, but they would circumvent the proper channels in order to invite violence against themselves. And to the extent that out comes the dogs and the hoses, there's a press to capture this, plaster it on the front of newspapers and magazines, show newsreels of it on television, so as to give you the impression like, oh, look, this is what they're doing to Negroes in the South for no other reason than they want equality. So they would change the reason. The reason wasn't just because they wanted equality. The reason was because they were doing it. They didn't go through the proper channels of performing their demonstrations. And what's interesting about the kind of communist strategy is it's always seeking to ignite friction. Mm-hmm. And it's looking for reactionaryism. Reactionaryism comes in all different packages. Sometimes it's rational, sometimes it's irrational. What they're interested in is the irrational reactionaryism.
Because it's about the revolution.
Yeah, because it's about the revolution. To the extent that a white person who is none the wiser, who can't see the communist hand behind all of it, comes out and does his counter protest, and he has a sign, we don't want N-words here, and this, that, and the third. That's what the press is mostly interested in. Because to the extent that you can capture that, you can make that look like the poster child of the entire South. You can make that look like it's the quintessential American belief. And you make the issue not about communism versus America, but rather black versus white. And you create these kind of these kind of frictions and these tensions in order to create enough unrest. And to the extent that that there's unrest in the streets, people will call out for federal response, and then you're well on your way to centralization of power, which the communists were hoping would eventually usher in communism. And so, to bring this back to King and to answer your question more specifically, it actually goes way back to Martin Luther King Sr., whose name was Michael King. Michael King was a guest an audience attendee I guess is fairer to say, to many communist front group events in the South from the 1930s to the 1940s. There was the preeminent civil rights movement in the 1930s was called the National Negro Congress. And the National Negro Congress was started by a commission under the FDR administration and Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union. Those two entities started the National Negro Congress. So you had the Feds and you had the Soviets starting this civil rights movement, and they put at the head of it A. Philip Randolph, who was a socialist labor activist, and a man named James Ford, who was the running mate to Earl Browder to the Communist Party presidential ticket for two presidential election cycles. Obviously, they were unsuccessful, but you had a white communist named Earl Browder and James Ford, a Negro communist. The two of them ran as president and vice presidential candidates. And after those tickets were unsuccessful, James Ford would go on to help A. Philip Randolph in the leading of the National Negro Congress. The National Negro Congress started a number of little brother, little sister front organizations, one of which was called the Southern Negro Youth Congress. And the Southern Negro Youth Congress, which was based in Alabama, would routinely host events in Atlanta and other places in the South. And each time it would come to Atlanta, there was Michael King Sr. there to enjoy the festivities. So too was Rosa Parks. She would attend them. Also, Ralph Abernathy, King's best friend, he would also attend these events. This is around the time that King Jr. was around 14, 15 years old. So what's interesting is that if you go back a little bit, a few years prior to that, Michael King Sr., who was a Baptist minister at the time, went to Germany for a Baptist convention. And this was shortly before the rise of Hitler. And he learned about Martin Luther, the great reformer, the great 16th century monk and reformer. And what he learned about Martin Luther was that Martin Luther was this great reformer, but more than that, he was a kind of revolutionary insofar that he took power from the Catholic Church and he, beckoned men to come and have a personal relationship with Christ. And he saw, as Karl Marx himself saw in Martin Luther rather, a kind of blueprint for how to revolutionize a ideology or theology rather with ideology. That's what Michael King Sr. Saw in Martin Luther, and I can pick that apart more if you want me to elaborate more on that later on.
Well, if you think it's important, I guess I'm just trying to discover, why he was chosen because there's somebody bigger than us running the show.
Yeah.
And they find peons to do their bidding but they have to be the right caricature, stereotype. Mm-hmm. They have to be resilient enough to become what they need them to be. You would hope it would be in a desire for legitimate help. I mean, clearly, Black America was suffering in the South. Jim Crow clearly is unconstitutional. Yeah. So there was problem. See, this is what gets muddy about this. Anytime, here we sit, we shouldn't have to say this. It's 2025. But if a black guy and a white guy is talking, everybody is suspect, depending on which grid you're seeing the world through. And it's like, well, what is his agenda? Well, what does he not see? Well, how is he not sensitive enough to the plight, and so forth? So you don't even really know how to ask questions sometimes because you're concerned that it's going to be misconstrued because they don't want us to be in unity. So why would Marxism appeal to a Black American over capitalism when it would appear he wasn't dumb. He seems like a fairly smart guy. When you're looking at what is going to give you the most potential for a positive result, what other belief system or philosophy created a middle class that found a way out of either poverty or riches. You're one of the two. And they found this other thing that Marx couldn't anticipate.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they had to abandon the economic model and find the bourgeoisie and the proletariat out of races or
Mm-hmm.
genders, because they had to find more victims to keep the game going. So
Yeah.
why would they not find communism, which at a minimum stunts your ability to overcome, because you're all stuck in the same in the same game with the same tokens. You don't get to be anything else. I guess I'm curious about what they thought the upside to that philosophy would be compared to what they were having. Specifically, like you said, when you looked around at Black American kids, even during Jim Crow,
Mm-hmm.
intact families, own home. I mean, they actually were pretty amazing and should have been an inspiration
Mm-hmm.
to Black America. Folks, I know it sucks. We got to get over this other stuff, but we're still doing pretty good. I don't know. I
Yeah.
mean, see, now that sounds insensitive for me to say that as a white guy.
No, it's not. It's actually not insensitive. And what you bring up a really, really good point, which I should have mentioned earlier, I guess, in my kind of breaking down of answering your question of Martin Luther King and his how much the communism influenced him.
Yeah.
Just to give, and with these, like, it's so rich with information and history that you kind of have to decide, okay, where do I want to start? I want to go back to his birth. I want to go to 100 years before his birth. And I know you're looking for more of a tight, kind of succinct answer. But when you look at Black America prior to the Civil Rights Movement, again, people have to understand that Booker T. Washington was a really big deal when it comes to Black Americans prior to the Civil Rights Movement. He was when you look at all the Booker T. Washington high schools that sprung up while he was alive, and, he died in 1915, even after his death, Martin Luther King himself went to Booker T. Washington High School there in Atlanta. He was a pretty big deal. And it wasn't so much that they just liked his celebrity. No, they really kind of heeded his teachings.
Yeah.
And the teachings were actually bringing forth fruit. You did see the ending of Jim Crow ordinances at the private and local level as a result of people actually putting Booker T. Washington's teachings and his lessons into practice, namely that, if you cast down your bucket where you are and you focus on your craft, don't worry so much about who is or who isn't racist. These things will work themselves out. And then, like, again, we have video archival footage of people in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, Blacks and whites, actually doing life alongside each other. Yeah. And there wasn't all this race friction that we learn about in our history books by ideologically driven historians. And that's right. Just what it is. And so when you look at Michael King Sr., who by that time in the late 30s was intrigued by Marxist ideology, specifically the social gospel. He was intrigued by the social gospel. He says in his unpublished memoir that he was a proponent of the social gospel. And what he saw in Martin Luther was, I can actually do that in America by ushering in the social gospel. And so,
but are you saying that Michael King Sr. Martin Luther, yeah, I know, but you said he was influenced by Martin Luther, who was this reformer and took on the most powerful entity at that time,
right,
at the risk of his life, clearly. So, are you saying that he saw from Martin Luther this idea of social justice, or he interpreted what he did and coined it? A phrase of that, or in other words,
no. So what I'm saying is that it wasn't so much the substance of what Martin Luther did; it was a tactic of the way Martin Luther did it. That's what he was intrigued by. Usurping the power and the authority from what was then the Catholic Church and bringing it down to the layman through the Reformation. Yeah, that's what Marx was intrigued by, and it's what Michael King Sr. was intrigued by, the sheer blueprint of how can I change something into something else. Yeah. And so whenever Michael King Sr. would come back to the United States after having visited Germany, he changed his own name to Martin Luther King Sr., and he changed his son's name to Martin Luther King Jr. because he saw myself and my seed as being the ones who will help usher in the social gospel into the United States.
And how did he define social gospel?
So the social gospel, he defined it the same way Walter Rauschenbusch defined it. Walter Rauschenbusch was a theologian at the turn of the 20th century, a German immigrant who was living in Hell's Kitchen, New York, who saw the poverty and saw the people living on the streets there in early 1900s New York, and didn't believe that the gospel was sufficient to deal with a lot of these issues. He visited London, Walter Rauschenbusch, and he became enamored of something called the Fabian Society, which I know you know what the Fabian Society is, but the Fabian Society, for those who don't know, these are people who believed, like Marx, that there should be a Marxist utopia. They just disagreed with Marx on how to get there. Marx called in the book, The Communist Manifesto, for workers of the world to unite for this fast-paced, sudden uprising of the proletariat to overthrow the aristocracy or the bourgeoisie rapidly, quick, fast, and in a hurry. Whereas the Fabians, they believed that it should be done incrementally, because the problem that you run into when you have a fast-paced revolution is you still have a large contingent of society who's not used to change, and they're going to be just as willing to fight you as a bourgeoisie. But what the Fabians realize is that we need everybody, as many people as possible on our side, and the way to do that is to infiltrate the institutions little by little.
The long march of the institutions.
Win gradually the respect and the hearts of the people through the institutions, to where by the time you get your utopia, you won't have as many people trying to fight against it. So they were more patient than your stone cold Marxists. And not only that, they were very deceptive. They believed that you should use the existing institutions to, in an underhanded way, push the Marxist ideology. So Walter Rauschenbusch was enamored by that. He came back to the United States and he penned a book called Christianity and the Social Crisis, which essentially extracted the power of the gospel from Christianity and made it all about politics and social activism. So it didn't preach at all salvation. It didn't preach, repenting of your sins and turning to Christ, irrespective of what your circumstances are. What it preached was social change through public policy. God came to change systems. He didn't come to change hearts. That's what the social gospel is. And this is what, this is what Michael King Sr. believed. And he changed his name to Martin Luther King Sr. because he wanted to popularize the social gospel, specifically in the Black church. And so, as it turns out, it wouldn't be him who would do that. It would actually be his son who would be far more successful in doing that. Dr. King wrote in his papers that by the age of 12, he rejected the deity of Christ. He rejected the virgin birth. He said that by 13, he shocked his Sunday school class by denying the resurrection of Christ. He didn't believe in the second coming of Christ. He didn't believe in the literal existence of hell. He wrote all of this stuff in his own papers, and he never recanted.
What papers? Which papers? These private papers? Is it a book? Was it published?
No. So these were papers that he wrote in college. Because the thing about King, he went to a liberal seminary called Crozer Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania, Chester, Pennsylvania, and I forget which volume it is actually. But I'm actually going to put all this stuff up on my website, the citations for everything that I'm talking about right now.
And I'm not doubting you. I'm just curious where we've never seen any of this information, especially as Christians, because I do believe that, this is a historical piece of information that anybody would find intriguing and curious. But as Christ followers, I mean, here's the thing. I believe Christ is, in fact, Messiah, the Jewish Messiah. That was predicted. That's what makes him unique. Jesus is the game changer. There's nobody like him in human history. There's nobody, no other religion has a Jesus. And so when I see that you abandon the hierarchy that God created, which is that he oversees everything, he's the ultimate government. You do have systems of government to protect the people and to institute peace and so forth. You have the church, you have the family, which was the first government, and so forth. If you reject the spiritual dimension, You essentially are creating a secular version of the best of Christianity, but it has no undergirding of power because it's human beings doing it, which
Right.
means they're going to have an agenda. They're going to the thing about Marxists is they're self-appointed elite. Nobody
Hmm.
votes for them. They just decide I get to be the top of the pyramid and I'm going to tell the rest of y'all how to do it.
100%.
So here comes Martin Luther King, you're saying to me, and maybe the first big kind of shock for those listening or watching, because most of my people, I guess, would be Christians. Yeah, if he's denying the basic tenets of Christianity, he's not a Christian.
Right.
So I mean, I don't know how else to do this. So are you saying then that he was leveraging Christianity because he knew it had such a foothold in the black community as a place of authority and a place where they trusted? So it was
Yeah.
a leveraging of it. Do you believe he wasn't actually a Christ follower, true believer, or did he maybe waver or maybe return a little bit? I don't know anything about
Yeah.
this
Well,
this
he saw
angle.
Christianity as a kind of tool.
Yeah.
He said himself, and this is actually in our docu series, that he believed that if religion was going to be of any good use, then it would have to basically be utilized for the purpose of ushering in social change, which from its face uh, does sounds kind of harmless depending on how you hear it. But this idea of if religion is going to be of any good use, as if it is not useful, if it doesn't actually
Yeah.
render the kind of change socially that I think there ought to be, which again is at odds with what Christ himself
Yeah.
said, because he never promised utopia. He never promised that you will get your glory here and now. In fact, he the way that Jesus put it, I mean, I forget exactly how he said it, but we can actually expect for there to be suffering, but we have to stay steadfast even in that suffering.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that we run to suffering or we deny ourselves sudden luxuries and sudden comforts. It's hard to to not be comfortable in a place like the United States because of this great country that our forefathers built. There's creature comforts everywhere you look, and so you would almost have to be a hermit if you're not going to be comfortable. But my point though is that when it comes to King, he in his relationship with the church, he said at Ebenezer Baptist Church when he was interviewed by NBC that because the reporter actually asked him, how were you able so quickly to become a leader? Like, what is, here's how he asked the question. What was it about Black people that made it so easy for you to become such a huge leader, such a big deal? And he said, well, the thing about Blacks is that most Blacks were already connected to some kind of church in their local community. And so because of that, it was very easy to kind of get in and to have this kind of captive audience to really preach this message of revolution and social justice. And so that's kind of the way that King saw Christianity. He saw Christianity as being no different than other world religions. He was very enamored of Hinduism, of Gandhi. He would read Gandhi regularly, not just because of the nonviolent demonstrations that Gandhi did in India, but also because of what he perceived to be the sage wisdom that Gandhi had about all manner of other things, not just demonstrations and tactics. And so
Well, it sounds like he was quite a utilitarian because he just
right.
it was using techniques that work, starting with his dad as he finds this guy in Germany. He's like, oh, Luther did this. Hey, let's use this. But
Right.
here's what's the interesting dichotomy, though, is and why it would be easy to kind of to deceive folks, I suppose, with your true intentions, is that the gospel is social.
Mm-hmm.
It does change people. It
It
does
does.
change the way you act. But the Christian true perspective is that you become a moral compass because you allow the living God to inhabit you. So you start changing and disciplining yourself as how you treat your neighbor.
That's
How
right.
I'm going to do that. The church is the one that started the soup kitchens. Yes, it wasn't supposed to be the government. Our
Right.
people did it because our people said, you're made in the image of God. Nobody else has ever said that. You're as intrinsically valuable as me. You're not just an instrumental valuable like the secular is going to say. So
Mm-hmm.
thus, I owe you my allegiance and love because you're literally my brother. And suddenly it's not a bumper sticker. It literally got, when monotheism came into being, it literally said, if I'm the only God and you are my creation, we are literally his DNA, then we are related. We're all brothers. There, so, but that had never been thought of before, that you didn't have that way of uniting humanity. And
Right.
so I guess what I'm saying is it's what so many people have tried to do is take the virtues of Christianity without the spirit, without the repentance, without the humbleness, without the realize that God runs this and he will do his work as I individually take care of my brother. And they're
Yeah.
trying to make it secular and think it's
Hmm.
still going to work because they're leftists. They think they can manufacture crap and it's going to work out, and it doesn't. And they can't even look at history and see this isn't effective. Why don't we learn from this? Because they have an agenda, and that is control and
Yeah.
power. So I'm not trying to wax eloquent on this perspective. I guess I'm just trying to help people see that it's easy to see why somebody could get strung along here because there is so many Christian ideas intrinsic in this conversation that feel, well, that is Christian, right? Don't we take care of the guy on the side of the road that's beaten and bruised?
Yeah.
So here comes King. He sees Marxism, I guess, as a means to free blacks, to bring them into a place of equality because constitutionally, did he have that high goal? And that really was his end goal? And he just happened to use he had a different technique than we realized
Yeah.
that he was using as the momentum to do this. I mean, he was cared about the black community or
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. Yeah. No denying it. And I really do appreciate, let me just pause to say, I really do appreciate your perspective and you're chiming into this conversation as well. And I don't know, maybe it's because you're a comedian and you have a way of looking at things and looking into those nooks and crevices that most people aren't used to looking into, that is able to make this stuff make sense to you. I don't know, but thank you for your perspective. I appreciate that. Were you gonna say something?
Well, not really, but I guess so. What I really am curious about, and that's why I really want to give you the lion's share of this, of this. But I want you to do it where you feel it's most effective, is kind of breaking down, I guess, and I don't mean this maliciously, but breaking down the icon. How do we start chipping away
Mhm.
and saying, you need to understand here? Okay, so you've already said he's a Marxist. Well, Marxism hates Christianity,
Mhm.
hates because we refuse to bow to the state. We serve God. So they have to get rid of the Christians because we will not follow the state.
Absolutely.
So in that regard, he has a dichotomy here. But he knew he could leverage his people in the
Mhm.
church because he was telling them, I'm gonna set my people free. But he had this incredible line that everybody knows.
Yeah.
I long for the day when my children will be judged not by the color of their skin, by the content of their character, which is a beautiful line and a Christian line. We are intrinsically valuable, not instrumentally valuable. But how do you square that again with Marxism? And maybe this isn't the right question. Maybe this is kind of not allowing us to really get deeper, but it's two different ideas. To say that I'm going to be judged by the content of my character implies that I can become whatever I want, and that might mean being a lot more than you. I might end
Mhm.
up with a business. I might end up with a thing. Communism does. You got no options. You all
Right.
become the thing, and that's that. You're a template. And there's a couple guys at the top that get to eat the meat while you're eating rutabagas. So help me understand,
Yeah.
I guess, some of the parts of him that you think would be the most stunning
Mhm.
to people, like for you, for example.
Yeah. I
I
see.
mean, what shocked you the most about him? Is like, and I have some ideas based on the FBI, the FBI
Yeah.
reports. If
Yeah.
they're legit, that they're pretty hardcore. But
Right.
give me your historian perspective without going into the salacious stuff. I mean, you can bring it up; it's real, I guess.
Yeah.
But the other stuff too.
Well, just to finish kind of my thought from earlier, it is shocking as a Christian for me to hear Martin Luther King, and I have video footage of him saying that. And again, you have to remember he's a Christian pastor. Just to give this context, so he believed that God is actually active in all the world religions, not just Christianity. This is what King himself said. So he kind of took this kind of a la carte or whatever shoe fits kind of approach to religion and to Christianity in particular. And, you know, when he went to seminary, when he went to Kozer Theological Seminary, by this time, many seminaries in this country were overrun by Marxist agents who infiltrated both Protestant and Catholic churches in seminaries. This is well documented in the work of Bella Dodd, as well as in some of the writings of Fulton Sheen, as well as, you know, Earl Browder and others. And Kozer Theological Seminary was one of those seminaries. Yeah. His favorite professors there was Morton Ensslin and a guy named George Davis, I'm sure. I think. And they were the ones who really kind of instilled the social gospel in King, as well as tactics on how to use the gospel, use the Christianity as a kind of mask to push something more sinister. He learned the Hegelian dialectic at Kozer Theological Seminary, and he would really learn the Hegelian dialectic at Boston University. And so the Hegelian dialectic, basically what it means as far as King is concerned, is taking the synthesis of the gospel of America and acknowledging the antithesis of this Marxist kind of radicalism that was already brewing in this country. And so you take the tensions between these two, thesis and antithesis, and then you deliver a synthesis where you take the so-called good of both of these ideas, and you push the new synthesis in the name of progress. And this keeps the synthesis becomes a new thesis, which naturally brings about a new antithesis, a new, more radical antithesis. Yeah. And then this cycle continues and continues and continues till all of a sudden you find yourself one day completely on the side of the antithesis. This is the kind of Fabian gradual incremental thing that King was actually learning to put into effect. And so by the time he becomes a pastor, by the time he graduates from college, he goes to something called the Highlander Folk School in Tennessee. And what this was a Marxist training camp ran by Miles Horton and I forget the other guy's name. I guess it's not important, but they run this communist training school. He goes there along with Rosa Parks and some of the other civil rights leaders. And then they go back to Montgomery and they lead something called the Montgomery bus boycott. So I'm saying all that to say that all of this was staged. It was strategized, not for the purpose of bringing about liberation for Black folks, but for the purpose of centralizing power into the federal government. That's what the civil rights movement is all about. The civil rights movement is about so agitating and so planning friction to create unrest in the streets. And to the extent that you have unrest, you then have people who are dissatisfied with that unrest. The idea is to make the southern states and the southern counties look like they're incapable of self-governance. And to the extent that any state or county look like it's incapable of self-governance, you cry out to the federal government to step in, to become a fixture. And once that foot is planted, it doesn't leave. Yeah. And so that's why the feds had an interest in keeping the civil rights movement going. They didn't agree that King should be at the head of it because of all the things that he was doing behind closed doors, the extramarital affairs and everything else. They believed that he was a liability. Mm-hmm. But they did believe that the civil rights movement should exist, just not with King at the head of it.
But the end game, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but what's the end game? That it was basically communist infiltration within the institutions to basically flip America into more of a communist or socialist, or at least start with socialism state. I mean, is that because eventually somebody has to be controlled. Let's face it, the Frankfurt School is in Germany, and then suddenly you have Soviet Union, and then it collapses. Well, who's running the show now? China? They're communists, right? They got a lot of power. Are they now trying to take the reins so they can destroy America? In other words, this long march, which worked, by the way, they did it. They did it. That's what DEI is. That's what all this is that we're trying to root out is that teachers aren't even taught to teach anymore.
Right.
They're taught to create to create the revolution and to use all history and ideas as a way to further the revolution. That's all they're
Right.
creating. It's horrific and demonic. But
100%.
I mean, I guess I'm repeating myself, but I just want to make
Well,
sure
you use
I
the
understand.
word you use the word utilitarian earlier to describe the Marxists.
Yeah.
And I think the word is 100% accurate. But the government is also utilitarian, because when you look at over the course of the 20th century, our very own government has funded and has initiated many a social justice movement for the very purpose of expanding its own power.
Okay.
You'll remember I said earlier that under the FDR administration, it teamed up with the Soviet Union to start a civil rights movement here in the United States.
Yeah.
The Soviets had a different interest in the civil rights movement than that of the feds, but they both wanted this movement to exist in perpetuity. The government wanted to centralize power for the purpose of expanding itself. The Soviets saw it as a means to usher in the Marxist ideology into the United States.
Yeah.
You asked another question earlier about, well, it probably wasn't a question, more of a statement, but it was a question about like why is it that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's something to the extent of why is it that communism is more
appealing,
desirable,
when it clearly doesn't give you the chance to raise yourself up to whatever heights you choose.
Yes.
So it seems counterintuitive to what supposedly they were trying to accomplish, coming from the history of slavery and being oppressed. It's like you think if any people want to say, I don't want any ceilings anymore. I want to go as high as I can get.
Right.
So it just seemed counterintuitive to the nature of what they were fighting for. So
well, the point though is that it wasn't always that way. It was the case that blacks here in America were more favorable of the free market system than of communism, and this was much to the chagrin of the Communist Party, because Booker T. Washington was certainly no communist. In fact, he spoke disparagingly of the communist ideology, whereas W.E.B. Du Bois spoke glowingly of the communist ideology. There was another historian named Carter G. Woodson who documented in his book, The Miseducation of the Negro, that it's actually only the small contingent of Black intellectuals who are intrigued by the communist rhetoric that they're hearing in college. He wrote this book in 1930, I think it was 1936, if I'm not mistaken. I'm going to have to go back and look into that. But he wrote that the Negro, by and large, is actually doing the very thing in the United States that the communist says he can't do: starting businesses, creating jobs, all the things. And it's interesting because when you go back to 1920, so successful were blacks and so on their way to success that the communists were really trying to figure out what to do about this. And so there was an American journalist named John Reed, who was a delegate to the convention, the Communist Convention there in Moscow. And he said that the problem is that the American Negro doesn't have a high political conscience. They are intrigued by people like Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver. They're buying things, they're building houses, they're really kind of embracing the American dream. Right. He doesn't realize that he's detested by the white man in America. He's just eating, drinking, and being merry. And so we must raise the political conscience of the Negro in America. And so as a result of this, Vladimir Lenin himself greenlit the utilization of any means necessary to raise a political conscience in America. That was in 1921. From 1921 to 1939, you saw all these race riots spring up seemingly out of nowhere. The idea being to raise the political conscience of the Negro. So how does that work? Well, if I'm a Negro shoe store owner and my business is doing quite well, I'm supplying shoes for your Black miners, your Black sharecroppers, your Black businessmen, and occasionally your white guy who stumbles in and needs some shoes, because my store is is open 2 hours later than the white store, whatever the case may be. And then there's a race riot that springs up out of nowhere, and all of a sudden my business is burned down. So tomorrow I don't have a business to go to. But then I open up my newspaper and I see an ad at the bottom: join the Communist Party to help protect you against systemic racism. Yeah. These articles actually exist. Join the NAACP to help fight against white supremacy. Which, by the way, the communists and the NAACP, they were working in cahoots on a number of different issues. And so the idea is to create friction and tension and unrest, take away the actual resources that were actually, I guess, a testament to how Blacks were actually on the rise here in the United States, to basically sink all of those resources and create this kind of shining glimmer of light, otherwise known as the NAACP or the Communist Party, as we are your only hope for race advancement. Yes. In the United States. And it's interesting because a 2019 study was conducted by the Cato Institute. And what it found was that Blacks in America, 62% of Blacks have a favorable view of socialism. 62%. Every other ethnic group, Asians, whites, Hispanics, had a more favorable view of capitalism. But Blacks were the only ethnic group that had a higher favorable view of socialism. And I think that is due to years of this kind of civil rights mindset that have taught us to take our hand off the proverbial plow, to pick up our picket sign and trust that picket sign will give us the success.
That's an interesting delineation, because why target, of all the oppressed or the minority or the marginalized, whatever colloquialism you want to use to, create your victim, why the Black? In other words, honestly, ironically, one of the greatest success stories in human history is Black Americans, because they started out as slaves with literally, nothing. Couldn't speak a language, can't learn, not allowed to educate. We'll tell you who to get married. We'll take your nothing. Even when they were free, they're like stuck with, we don't kind of know how to be free. We don't know what, it was the worst case scenario other than maybe the Native Americans. And within 150 years, they're senators and they're congressmen and they're business owners and millionaires and entrepreneurs that are showing American dream actually works, even for those who didn't participate that willingly initially. So, and again, hard to say, but I just speak truth out of a white man's mouth. But the slave history and what was accomplished by your people, and I say that as an American, but I'm not African, should be inspiring. This is unbelievable what was accomplished. And it's like they infantilize Blacks and turn you into children that don't even glory in their heritage. Yes, it was evil, but don't you see the redemption that came out of this? Don't you see the miracle that came from this thing that you should embrace and teach to your next generation of Blacks so they can go out and do the same thing? So it's interesting that it seems that race was targeted as opposed to Irish, or as opposed to Asians, or as opposed to Hispanics. So there must have been something in the culture they felt they would have an easier way to manipulate. But, here's what's interesting, Chad, is that it's almost like we could have had two conversations, because the dynamic between Marxism and what it is doing in America is important and crucial because it's happening. But the Martin Luther King angle is really obviously what I wanted to emphasize. And by the way, I don't have a hard stop. You might, so I don't want to keep you if you need to go, but I'm good.
No, ask me whatever you want. Again, and I understand that with these questions, the way that my brain works is like, whenever you ask a question or anyone else asks a question, I want to answer the question directly, but I also want to give the entire backdrop and the backstory of what was unfolding and what so
Well, it's important, and please do not apologize. I love your insight and your research and the data. It's crucial. What I'm saying is, though, that it also becomes its own episode because it's even equally more. Like I had James Lindsay on, a number of months ago, atheist guy, but truly understood the threat of Marxism and what's happened in culture. So again, I only bring on truth tellers. I don't care what your belief system is. I'll try to get you saved, but I can't guarantee. But anyways, so let's get back to Martin Luther King because I guess I want to start kind of digging out these things that I guess people wouldn't have known. Now, again, if you were anybody that paid attention to the FBI releasing of the files, the sexual stuff was pretty horrendous. It's like you're going, are you serious? Orgies, a woman being raped, he's cheering. It's like it's beyond, it's so outside of what you think this guy is that it's almost like I think they probably just made that up to disparage the guy. And I don't even know if I want to stay in that lane because it's interesting, but another sex thing that so many people fall into. But I am interested in the other pieces of this puzzle that I guess would seem the antithesis of the character that was created and uplifted amongst our culture. So tell us other shocking. I mean, and I'm not trying to make it like a National Enquirer.
No, there's plenty. There's plenty.
Show me things that would have been so.
Yeah.
Maybe for yourself as a black man. Let's start there. Here, you're a black guy, but you seem to just care about the truth, and we shouldn't have to make that that preface. But were you in some ways deflated by that? Did you feel like, oh my,
most
come
certainly.
on, are you serious? Like, can't we have somebody that is our guy? So tell me, how did it affect you psychologically when you started stumbling upon this stuff?
That's a good question. It was a roller coaster of emotions because when I learned that King wasn't what I thought he was and who I thought he was, it caused me to look deeper into, okay, what was history really like in the 20th century? And to learn that this idea of systemic racism was not as prevailing as I was taught, that was reassuring. When I learned that there were other black men who disagreed with King in his own time, and how the press actually went out of their way to make King look larger than life, and by comparison, make these other men basically a footnote in history. That was sad, but it was actually encouraging that such men existed, because I was taught that Martin Luther King had the answer. He had the answer key. He was the only way. There was nobody else.
And what did these other guys disagree in real time when it wouldn't have been popular to the black community? What were they disagreeing with? What did they see that nobody else saw at that time?
That's a good question. So we mentioned the bus boycott earlier, the Montgomery bus boycott, and all the communist training that went into that. There was a minister by the name of Joseph H. Jackson. He was the pastor of Olivet Baptist Church in Chicago. He was actually born and raised in Mississippi, and he was 15 years old when Martin Luther King passed away. He preached the gospel. He believed the fundamental tenets of Christianity, and he desired for his fellowship, his congregation, to be born again. That was his whole thing. But he was also a very gifted preacher. He was invited all over the world, including to Moscow, to preach the gospel. And he was the president of what was called the National Baptist Convention. It was the largest Black Baptist convention in the country. It boasted around 5 to 7 million churchgoers, Black churchgoers. And so early on, whenever they first launched the bus boycott, Jackson was none the wiser. Sorry, my kids are running around in the studio.
That's all right.
So Jackson was none the wiser, and he wanted to donate a bus or some buses to King and the movement. And King said, no, we don't need the buses, but we will take money. And so Jackson said, okay. So he went into the pockets and he gave King $2,000, which is a lot of money for 1959. for their efforts. But he soon learned that, oh, these guys aren't interested at all in Black economic empowerment or anything of that nature. There's something very sinister going on here. And he put together really quickly that there were communist influences surrounding King, like Bayard Rustin, like Ella Baker, Stanley Levison, Clarence Jones, and many others, Jack Odell, all of these, strange bedfellows that King was surrounded by. And, you fast forward to 1963, Stanley Levison advised King that this Joseph H. Jackson has to go. He can't be the head of the largest Black church organization in the country. The way to advance the social gospel is by getting your faction at the head of the National Baptist Convention. And so the plan was to get a minister named Gardner C. Taylor, who was a veteran in the National Baptist Convention, at the head of the convention to become the president, and that King would come in after him and succeed him as the president. So they had this whole elaborate plan, and they wanted to oust Jackson from his position. Well, as it turns out, the delegation voted in favor of Jackson by a landslide, and King and Taylor and the other contingent came into the convention. They were upset. They wanted to see a roll call, and they rushed the stage. And in the rushing of the stage, there was a minister that was pushed off the stage, hit his head, and died. And so as a result of this, King and his whole faction were kicked out of the National Baptist Convention, and they started something called the Progressive National Baptist Convention, which still is in existence to this very day. And they support things like LGBT, they support things like abortion. That's what the Progressive National Baptist Convention is. And so, again, all of these stories, I think, are important because it gives you a better, more clearer picture of who King was, what he was surrounded by. You mentioned the sexual escapades and things that he was involved in behind closed doors. Well, as it turns out, Stanley Levison, who encouraged King to hire his attorney, Clarence Jones, who was an entertainment lawyer out of LA, he was the one who would actually arrange these sexual meetings for King. He would send women to King's motel room. But Clarence Jones is one of the people who had a hand in writing the I Have a Dream speech. The same guy who's sending women to King's room had a hand in writing the I Have a Dream speech. You mentioned the line about not being judged by the color of your skin, but by the content of your character. That line was actually written by Stanley Levison, again, a atheist, ethnically Jewish. Well, not that matters, just means to say that he's not Black.
Well, it kind of does matter because I don't care who wrote it, other than if it wasn't Martin Luther King.
Right.
That's a big deal. I mean, because that is his most iconic line, let's face it. So,
exactly. So he wrote that line. And what's interesting about that line is it actually was lifted from a newspaper article that was written in 1872 by a Confederate journalist. Who wrote, surely a day will come in South Carolina where the men won't be, they use the word judge, they use the word measured, not by their giveness of tongue or the color of their skin, but by their conduct and their character. And so this was actually a very famous saying in the South from the 1800s well into the early 1900s. And so it wasn't as though, King originated this idea of people being judged by their character as well, as opposed to their
Well, I don't want to get off in the weeds, but you said that line came out of the South in like 1870s. Are we talking about Civil War? Was that what they were trying to justify? It's like, look, we failed, we lost, we look like idiots, we've disgraced ourselves. Maybe we can retrieve our honor. I mean, I'm just speculating now, but I mean, I guess, I was just curious if it would have been ironic if it came from the Civil War that he was trying to retrieve the honor of the white Southerners, and then suddenly that is used. Still a good line, still works, still matters.
It still works, still a good line.
Yeah.
But the idea, though, behind it was, I mean, the Civil War is a very interesting piece of history that most of us get wrong because of our schooling. Like if you read not only the slave narratives, but if you read the narratives of aging Confederate soldiers, many of them didn't believe that they were fighting a war for the preservation of slavery. They believed that they were fighting a war in honor of their individual states. They believed that they were fighting for states' rights.
Yeah.
If you look at the writings of Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederate States, he didn't believe that slavery should exist in perpetuity. He believed that the South should have a right to end slavery on the same basis as the North was able to end it. That is to say, incrementally as industrialization was phasing out and all the things, because slavery existed for all of mankind's history.
Yeah.
And that doesn't justify it. What it means, though, is that the narrative that we have of slave is by and large Northern propaganda. Books like Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. She lived in Connecticut. She didn't spend a day in the South. Films like Roots, Alex Haley admitted that much of the story was exaggerated and embellished.
Right.
He admitted that it was fiction. And so again, this idea of slavery being this atrocious thing where every day you were working in the elements and having a whiplash across your back, all of, much of that is Northern propaganda. That doesn't justify slavery. It just means that, perhaps there's, perhaps it's more nuanced than we're.
But you know what? You have to be able to reason yourself out of some of the propaganda. It's very difficult once you've decided something is true. And we've learned more and more in the last number of years how impossible it is to really vet information. We don't know what's true anymore. We really don't. Right. But I mean, like you just talked about the South, we call it the Civil War. They called it the War of Northern Aggression because they were fighting for states' rights, which was constitutional. They were saying and so when you say the truth, like you just said, about that, yes, the South figured we'd have to weed this out. Even the founding fathers, from their writings, from the get-go, said this slave thing ain't going to work because we're supposed to be free. But if we focus on this now, the union's going to fail, and then we don't got nothing. So we're going to have to do this in a way that allows it to be pragmatic about this, or we're just going to kill ourselves. We need
and not to cut you off, but just to kind of bring in that point, to bring that point home about like why I even brought up the newspaper article is around. So after the war of Northern aggression, or the war between the states, whatever you want to call it, you had this kind of season of what we call Reconstruction. And you had what was called carpetbaggers and scalawags, as far as the South are concerned, coming in, imposing their will on the South, treating them not co-equal sovereign entities, but as conquered men, treating the South as a conquered territory. And they were disenfranchising white folks, specifically white men, because they saw them as traitors. And so they said the only way that you would have your right to vote is by recanting your loyalty to this Southern heritage, and by reclaiming your citizenship with the Union. And many Southerners, being too prideful, wouldn't do it. The black man, however, in many cases would do it. And so blacks were enfranchised to vote. This is how you got a lot of your black congressmen and senators in those days. And the Union soldiers were going out of their way to try to create this race friction, or to pounce on this kind of race division that was going on, at least as far as the Southerners were able to see it. So that's where that line came from. Well, surely a day is coming.
Yes, that's what I was referencing. That's what I meant. Like, it sounds like that would have been what they were defending, is we've been disgraced and we need to retrieve our honor again. And South is about honor. So that's why it sounded like, I'll bet you that's where it is. But isn't that strangely ironic, I guess, is what I've already said, but that retrieval of my dignity as a white Southerner who lost a war that allowed them to have slaves could be retrieved and repurposed for black people to be set free in an unconstitutional Jim Crow's and so forth. So again, the truth was still good and beautiful and important and powerful. It's hard to think about, Chad. It's hard to think about I was born in 1960, so I did live in a time when I could, if I was in the South, I wasn't. I was in Indiana, Free State. But if I could have gone to get a drink of water, and you couldn't have drank from the same thing. And it seems so ludicrous that that could have ever passed muster. But it just shows how difficult cultural change is. Things that have lasted for a long time and become the the tapestry of a culture and a nation, you can't just tear it apart and think it's going to work. It's going to take time for people to reimagine what it's supposed to look like, because they're so rooted in things, their tribe and their heritage, their ethnicity. So I guess what I'm curious about with MLK is, if people try to summarize kind of what you and I have talked about, just in some of the things that perhaps they didn't know, and the lion's share of the information was about him being basically a communist. Now, I'm not sure if what you're telling me is he was a communist, or are you telling me, nah, yeah, maybe not, but it was mainly he just leveraged communism techniques and concepts to control the narrative and to create a power structure. Or do you say, would you sit there and say, I got to tell you, the guy was a communist? That's really what he was.
Yeah, he was certainly a Marxist.
Okay.
And I mean, and that's the thing. Like when people ask me whether he was a communist,
Yeah.
one of the things I think to take into consideration is that by design, communist strategy makes it difficult to answer that question with a simple yes or no. There's a article written by a man named J.B. Matthews. He was a communist who defected, and then he kind of blew the whistle on some of the inside baseball of the way communism works. And he wrote an article for the American Mercury, which was a popular magazine in those days. And the title of the article was Reds and Our Churches. And he basically said in this magazine, like he said, there's actually 5 categories that communists put you into. The first is a card-carrying member. The second is a adherent to the party line. The third is a fellow traveler. The fourth is an espionage agent. And the fifth is a dupe of subversion. And so, or a useful idiot. So those are the 5 categories. So the question for me isn't whether King was a communist. It's what of those categories did he fit into? And the answer will change depending on where in his career we're talking. He was a dupe of subversion, but he also was an adherent to the party line, because he was getting his direction from Stanley Levison, who he knew was a communist, and he would go where he said go, do what he said do. And he did all this knowing full well that many of what Stanley Levison was telling him was coming directly from the Soviet Union.
So you made this documentary, you wanted to get it out there. And I guess, tell me a little bit about what your goal is here. Obviously, you seem to be a historian. You're curious about the truth, but there's going to be backlash from you because you're Black, and unfortunately, you're not allowed to disagree with particular perspectives by particular groups of people that have decided how Blacks are allowed to think. And I'm just a comic, so I love free speech. It's sacrosanct to me. The barometer of free nation is speech. That tells you where you're at. How much can you or cannot you not do? Martin Luther King spoke eloquently. He was charismatic. But I guess if you were to kind of help summarize what your goal is in the long run, and then if you would just kind of maybe tease apart a few ideas about him that you found really, shocking to you, or just so curious, but also maybe you came across some stuff you didn't know that was also endearing or nice or good, or like, wow, guy he had some qualities clearly that had to be positive. I mean, he I don't know. I'm not going to decide for you how to describe that, but tell us about your project, and then both sides of this man, because we have to decide what that means going forward, I guess.
Yeah. So the objective of the civil rights movement, without a doubt, was the Sovietization of the Black church, first and foremost, and America at large. That was the objective. And it's something that the communists were trying to do for quite a long time in this country. They tried to do it through the labor unions in the 1920s and 30s. They tried to do it through the women's movement. They tried and were successful in doing it in the Black movement, the Black civil rights movement. They weren't as successful in trying to get it done under Paul Robeson, who was a famous celebrity. He was a singer, an actor. They weren't as famous. They weren't as successful in doing it under someone like the socialist activist A. Philip Randolph. But they did find success in Martin Luther King because here was somebody who was behind a pulpit, and he was able. He was a gifted speaker, a great orator. He can move a crowd with his words. It didn't matter that the words weren't written by him. It didn't matter that all of his handlers were communists. I had mentioned earlier about the fact that when it comes to the question of whether King was a communist or not, that's a difficult question to answer. And they make it difficult because when it comes to doing the bidding of the Communist Party, you're more successful, especially during the Cold War, if people don't actually know that you're a communist. In fact, Bella Dodd, who wrote the book School of Darkness, so depending on where King was in his career, I think will determine which one of those five he fell into. And so again, it was, I guess, to put it, I guess, in a concept, what King represented was a very beautifully painted Trojan horse. And the objective of the docuseries, of the MLK Project docuseries, is to basically make the case that he was, in fact, a Trojan horse. And the question then becomes, particularly for the church, what do you do with that information?
Yeah.
You decide to still be mesmerized by the pretty, well, at least it was painted beautifully. At least the colors are pretty.
Right.
Or do you actually do what the Bible says, which is to not be taken captive by hollow and deceptive philosophies? Do you actually do what the Bible says in terms of exposing the apostates and all these other folks who come as angels of light, not for the purpose of hating them, not for the purpose of, having yet another enemy or boogeyman to look down on, but for the purpose of distinguishing truth from lies, that you might pursue the truth.
Yeah.
The Bible says in James, draw near to God and God will draw near to you. And there's so many supplementary figures that we look at and that we look to when Christ is a good shepherd. Peter literally told Jesus, like, Lord, to whom else shall we go? You alone have the words of eternal life. That's not to say that pastors aren't necessary. They absolutely are. God established his church on the earth for a reason, because the sheep need to be led. There's sheep and there's shepherds. But at the same time, those who profess to be shepherds, those who profess to be teachers, will be judged more harshly than the rest of us, because they carry a very big burden, and that is to lead God's people well. And so, this idea that King would take the pulpit that is meant for shepherding God's people to live in accordance to the scriptures, and basically utilize that in the purpose of advancing the communist cause, which is antithetical and in fact hostile to the Christian cause, I think is quite diabolical, and it's worth exploring. Not for the purpose of hating King, but for the purpose of understanding that there will be other such MLKs that will come along and that are currently among us. And the idea is that we make a distinction between the counterfeit gospels that exist. And the social gospel is, in fact, the counterfeit gospel, and what the Bible actually says, that we might draw to what the Bible actually says. And so when you look at someone like King, he's embraced across the political spectrum. Both folks on the right and the left embrace him. There's a 40-foot statue erected in his honor in Washington, D.C., and none of the words that's etched in stone on that monument says anything about God. It's all political. We have a national holiday that recognizes him year after year after year. It's mandatory that you learn about him in American public schools, and many private schools for that matter. And that is to say that the king kind of mythology is very pervasive and it's institutional. It's in our music. It's in our movies. He's the only religious figure that the secular society enshrines to the degree that they do. And so why is that? You know, other than to push a cause and a purpose that's actually not in alignment with God's word, but something that seeks to erect a kind of Tower of Babel 2.0. And that's what I liken it to. I mean, with the Tower of Babel, you had the ruler Nimrod who commissioned this tower, and it's in a time when everybody spoke the same language, and they wanted to build something that paid homage to self, that pays homage to man. And of course, as you know, God confuses the languages. We disperse across the earth. We become nation states. We become peoples. But then God will do something interesting. He would come down, born to a poor woman, laid in a manger in Nazareth, the ghetto of of those days, and he would preach the gospel. And he was fully God and yet fully man. So he descended and came down and dwelled among us, and he preached the perfect message. He would actually go up on a cross and take on the punishment of man, die a brutal, gruesome death, and then buried for 3 days, raise again. He raises again, then he ascends. And in his ascension, he calls those of us who call upon his name to be ascended with him, to sit with him in glory. And so rather than erecting towers that pays homage to self, we can build God's kingdom by preaching the gospel, preaching Christ and him crucified. That's the only ascension that those of us who are God's remnant should be interested in. But what's happening with King and the legacy of King is that governments are using his name time and again, election after congressional session after congressional session, to push socialist policy. King would want this. If King was alive, he would want that. They build all these socialist societies because they envision a utopia that that again pays homage to the greatness of man. And that's not why Christ came. He came to save individual souls.
Well, and I'm so grateful that your impetus for this whole thing is the faith in the living God. I mean, that's what we are supposed to all bow our knee to as true believers. I love that that you talked about the ascension, because that's what the Tower of Babel was. They were trying to make an edifice, like you said, to the skies and say, look what man has done. But there was no edifice. Christ just sort of floated up. And so when we look into the skies, into the ethers, that's God's edifice.
Yes.
Build one of these, one of these, guys, and look up, because your redemption draweth nigh. But there is somebody over all of this that's bigger and more important. That is truly that to be worshipped. So what are we to make then of this? Buddy, this is going to be a way hard sell to the African American church. What you're saying, I can't imagine. And I'm going to say something that is maybe not balanced, so I hope I can find some balance in it. But I've been in a lot of ministries over the years. I worked with Promise Keepers, performed for many years, which is a men's event. And I just had a woman on that I was talking to about this, a black woman. I said, the thing that was interesting about Promise Keepers is they jump through hoops trying to be inclusive. They had black singers, black speakers, presidents. They really were just trying to make an ecumenical Christ follower, come on in, we want us all to be one type of thing. And the black church was absolutely resistant to being part of it. I do feel like the vibe was it's the white guys thing. And T.D. Jakes will make his black version. So there is this intrinsic tribalism that the church does take upon itself. There is a racial component, a racist component from both sides, because we're sinners. And so it broke my heart in a way, because I'm like, I don't know how to do this. If nobody wants to jump in when we are literally offering you, I don't know what else to do. We found every color like you we could find to show. I don't know how else to show. And we're all following the unity of Christ, which has no boundaries. He literally said there's no Jew or Gentile. There is no identity and ethnicity. There is no bond or free. So there is no identifying in a class system. There is no male or female. So there is no identifying in your sexuality or your gender. You honor all those things. You honor your ethnicity. You honor that my people were slaves and look what we did. You never forget that. But that's not your identity if you're Christian. Your identity is, I'm a child of God. And if you can do that, you can become one. So it sounds to me like, brother, and I mean that literally, that's what you're saying. I don't care who has to be toppled if they have tried to replace where Christ belongs.
Yeah, they set themselves up against the knowledge of God.
So, but would you say, so let's try to kind of see if we can find a place where where MLK belongs.
Mm-hmm.
So if he's a Marxist, that is the antithesis of Christianity. So that's odd there. If he was leveraging and manipulating faith to get blacks to join the movement to create revolutionaries, well, then that's deceptive and that's satanic, because it's the father of lies that would do that. So he's got a giant statue. Well, we've seen what happens when BLM riots come in. Statues need to come down, baby. Statues need to. We found the truth now. George Floyd has shown us that every statue comes down whether you vote for it or not. So it sounds to me like his statue needs to come down if we're going to do that. But what we tried to say with the Southern generals' statues and so forth was, this is part of our history too. And there's something about this that must be remembered. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's tainted. Maybe it comes with some baggage and maybe some ill intent. But let's not forget what really happened. So where does he belong now in the pantheon of American history? How should we think of him? I mean, if everything you're saying is true, frankly, there's no role for him to play anymore other than a deceiver and deceptive. That's pretty harsh, but is that where we're left?
Well, that's a really good question. I think that when it comes to the statue in Washington, D.C., and when it comes to the national holiday, these are the fact of the matter is, although we may have started out as a Christian country, we're fastly becoming not a Christian country. When you look at America's institutions, when you look at the values or the lack of values that are perpetuated in the public square, when you look at our institutions and what's being taught in our schools, children are literally being taught that there is no God, insofar that they're taught that Darwinian evolution is hard fact, and if that's hard fact, then Genesis must be a lie, and if God can't quite get the account of how the world came into existence right, then how can he be trusted anywhere else in the Bible? That's kind of the insinuation of what's being said there. The values are just not in alignment with the scriptures at all, and so I don't expect, even after multitudes of people reveal or believing this information that we're setting forth in this docuseries, that those monuments will come down. I don't suspect that at all. But for me, I'm not as much concerned about that as much as I'm concerned about the church. I want for the monuments to come down within the church. I want for these apostates who we celebrate and worship in the church, I want for us to take those down and get back to what saith the Lord. When it comes to this idea of race relations and how we as brothers must get along and how we must treat those who are not brothers, the scriptures are sufficient for that. When you look at the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, that Jesus said everything that needs to be said and better, And so it's nice that King wanted racial equality and unity and all the things, but for me as a historian, I can't help but look at what undergirded those quote unquote beliefs that he had. That he was basically being deceptive and trying to get into the good graces of the American people in the midst of the Cold War to push something far more nefarious. And how, to me, I can't gaze upon the Trojan horse and admire its colors without acknowledging that it's a Trojan horse. And so that's as far as I see it. But whether the secular society removes the monuments or keeps them up, I can't really say.
Yeah, no,
But
and I'm not even advocating. I'm just saying
yeah.
it would seem if we're being consistent
Mm-hmm.
and we're dealing with a guy that was duplicitous
Mm-hmm.
in what he said he was, and clearly was the antithesis of what America was, then it would just seem like, well, this maybe isn't a good fit. We're now dealing with fraudulence or whatever.
Right.
If we were going to be a true moral, courageous nation, we'll say, oh, well, I guess we have to rethink history now.
Mm-hmm.
And, and maybe he belongs, like all the rest of them, to be remembered for what he did, because it does seem like and I'm not a utilitarian, I'm just saying that there was some good, I guess, that did come clearly.
Well, my question to that, Brad, that when people ask or say that he did something good, my question is always, well, what good did he do?
I guess part of the civil rights movement, getting LBJ to sign on, who was super racist. So I don't know how he pulled that off. So, I don't know. I mean, even if he was a figurehead that was manipulative to help accomplish the end of Jim Crow and so forth, I guess you don't see that as a positive.
I don't. And the reason I don't, and again, I'm not trying to be like provocative or controversial. I don't, because of the fact that you do see the fading away, the repealing of Jim Crow laws well before King was even born.
Okay.
These things were actually happening on an incremental, reformative basis. I'm the kind of guy who welcomes reformation, not revolution, not this fast pace, broad sweeping of legislation to fix our problems, because to the extent that you do that, you don't really fix what actually ails mankind. Whenever you do that in such a broad stroke.
Yeah.
And not only that, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was terrible law. When you look at the fact that first and foremost, it infringes upon your constitutional right to freedom of association. And I understand that freedom of association can't really work in an immature society. You have to be a mature society in order to implement freedom of association. In other words, I, as an individual and as a business owner, should be able to serve whom I please for whatever reason I please, and not serve who I don't want for whatever reason I want.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with that. I've said this before. I honestly believe that, and again, and you said earlier in the interview about maybe being a comic gives me a different perspective. Well, for sure, because we care about human nature. We try to see what really is going on, but we really, really, really care about words, because whoever controls the words controls the people. And so I want to be able to, I don't believe in hate speech. I don't believe I don't believe it's true. There's speech I hate, but there's not hate speech.
Right.
I don't believe in hate hate laws, like because to me that is
hate crimes.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
hate crimes. Because what you're saying is, if I kill you, that's terrible. But if I kill you because you're gay, that's really, really terrible. Say, wait a minute. How about murder's enough?
There you go.
I don't care why you did it. That's enough.
There you go.
I see through all this, but it is harder, unfortunately, because of the control of the dissemination of information by the progressives that run the game when it comes to that. Guys of my hue aren't given access to these words. I don't care. I'll say them. I'm just saying most of my colleagues in the Caucasian realm are cowards. They allow them to say, you're not going to say that because it might be conceived as racist. Is it racist? No. Then say it. Then say it.
Exactly.
What are you talking about? Either you care about free speech or not. And it only matters, it only is free speech if you allow speech you hate. That's the only time it matters, because
Right.
I don't have to convince you to believe in things that I believe in, but that I also don't need you. If you
Yeah.
believe in things I believe in, I can talk to myself in the mirror. I need to persuade those who disagree, if it's possible. Now, guys like me are getting shot in the neck for believing things that we do without compromise. So, I
And
mean,
one thing I'll
well,
add to that though is that, like, because I think you bring up a really good point. And now let me speak when it comes to guys of my hue.
yeah,
When I look at history and I see that the way that blacks were trending prior to the civil rights movement, and I look at my own family lineage and the land that we acquired, the education that we had, the family formation and the marriage rates and everything else that goes along with it. Um, I'm not sure if you can hear my kids in the background.
it doesn't bother me. Don't worry
Okay.
about it. Don't worry
Okay,
about it.
good. But when I look at all of that, and then I look at somewhere along the line, we embraced the civil rights movement and the rhetoric therein, and then from that point forward, it went all downhill from there. For someone like myself who was born in 1990, like the feeling is that I was actually robbed of something for a lie,
Okay.
because ideas have consequences.
Yeah.
And so while white people and progressives and everyone gets to celebrate that we have this symbol, Martin Luther King, meanwhile my family is in shambles. You know, I'm robbed of my inheritance because we chose to let our hand off the proverbial plow and pick up the picket sign. But you have your symbol. Okay, good for you. Like, you have your national holiday. But what about the fact that, like, not only do we have we lost our inheritance, but we've
Yeah.
lost the mindset and the cultural kind of milieu that made up who we once were as a people in this country.
So you're talking about Black Americans.
Black America.
Okay, so you're saying that so what really happened, you're saying, is that you actually regressed, that it actually is taking you backwards. When things were even rougher, you still survived and thrived. And what you're saying is, had we been left to ourselves, we would have been pretty good. We would have been fine. Now, clearly, some of these laws had to come to an end. But I think what you're telling me is
They were on their way out.
they would have done by organically. That's why I said I believe in free speech, and I agree with you too. This is odd, and it sounds odd, but if you have the power to look at things objectively and logically, and not fear the smears, then it's this. I want a restaurant where I say I don't want to serve black people. I want the option to do that, because the market's going to weed me out.
Yes.
Nobody's going to go. Nobody, but the better news is I'm still free.
Right.
I'm just not going to make any money doing this thing. But at least I know who my bigots are.
Yes.
I
I
want
know
to
that
know
my
who.
food won't be spat in.
Yeah, I want to know who the bigots are, because
Right.
you know the guy. Nothing is more dangerous. You know, I just saw a stat on this No Kings movement that while we're taping this, that happened like a week or two ago, and do you know the majority of the demographic that went to that was white progressive women over 40.
Yes.
That
Yes.
was the lion's share of. So these are people who have never suffered,
Right.
who have never been uncomfortable, who've abandoned God, abandoned religion. They've been taught that the patriarchy has destroyed them, that if they're not a CEO, they haven't accomplished anything, that suddenly being a wife and a mother, which is the most glorious accomplishment you could have as a human, is somehow something to despise. So they got nothing. They've been also left a shell of people and have nowhere to go. So they need performative art to feel like they belong to something. It's their church, because let's face it, progressivism is a religion, clearly a cult. And so I guess and again, I hope it's not being, so I'm trying to compliment you without it sounding demeaning, but I'm grateful for people who are able to step outside of the earth suit we wear, and say, I just care about the truth, and it doesn't come in any color. It doesn't
Right.
come in any color. Truth has no color. It has no substance. It's transcendent. It's bigger than material, and so thus it's clear. It fits everybody who wants it. And I guess I'm going to be honest. Sometimes, perhaps, white people who have watched this constant disparaging now of my race, and we're all racist, and there is no redemption in progressivism, by the way. There's a lot of flagellation, but there's no redeeming, there's no forgiveness, that's for dang sure. So it's a counterfeit of Christianity, but it's with all the worst case scenario because it's the antithesis.
Right.
I mean, when I see a guy that, to me, back to my baseball analogy, is just really good at what he does. I speak the truth. I'm a historian. Whatever that is what is true. I care about America. I'm an American. I'm a Christ follower. That's what drives me. And it's irrelevant what suit I'm wearing while I'm getting there because I don't care. But we all say that. But when it comes time to do it, and it might cost you something, people fear. And Corona exposed that more than anything, how easily
Oh,
people
yeah.
will give away their liberties. That's what was heartbreaking. Not that the government tried to steal our liberties, which they did, but that people gave them away. That's
Yeah.
where I realized this ain't the same America we used to be. I think there's even a differentiation now between a citizen and an American. If you're born here, you're a citizen. If you apply and get your citizenship, you can become a citizen of America, and it comes with privileges.
Hmm.
And it used to be the most privileged thing you could be is a Roman citizen. That was a big deal.
Right.
But you know what I've realized now? You can be a citizen now and hate your country. So you're not an American. And that's more important. It used to be, it went with the game. American is a citizen, is American. Not now. An American is someone who believes that his country is sovereign, that its borders should be protected, that we have a common language, we have a common history, we have a common foundation. Yes, it's immigrants that came here on purpose, who assimilated, brought the best of their culture, older cultures, to us, made us better, made us richer, but then they became one of us. So that if we lose that, we have no America. And by the way, that answer ain't in Donald Trump. That answer is in Jesus Christ.
Amen.
That's the end of that story. So I
Amen.
guess, as I tried to say, if there was a place for Martin Luther King left with what you've discovered, or how about this, Chad? Martin Luther King represented the best of us. That at least that was the idol that was created. That you care about content of character. You care about, all I want is give me meritocracy. Not I don't, I just give me a chance. I'll make it, or I won't, on my own accord. He believed in just give me the same access, and that's good enough, and so forth and so on. And so those principles are beautiful. Is there a Martin Luther King equivalent who's actually that guy in the black community, or maybe he's in the white community, but in America, that we can say, here's kind of the real deal of what this edifice was, that was Martin Luther King, that was used to accomplish what they did? Anybody that can fill that space and is the someone to be emulated?
That's an interesting question. And I think that, like, I tend to, I tend not to go out of my way to try to promote a specific historical individual as someone who ought to be emulated. I tend to point to Christ and Christ alone. And I know that's the easy kind of Sunday school answer, but it's something I genuinely believe. After I researched King and found out the things that I found out, and was really grieved by what I saw and learned, I went out and I got a sweatshirt made, and it said, "Worship God, not man." And I was complimented everywhere I went wearing this sweatshirt, and enough people said, "Hey, you should start selling those." So for about 3 months, I was selling these sweatshirts, "Worship God, not man." I'm not a big merch guy, so I didn't really, make it a lasting thing. I just did it for about 3 to 6 months. And a lot of people bought that sweatshirt. But the whole idea behind it was just coming out of this place of like, man, I used to put King on such a pedestal. And for all the reasons that I should actually be looking to Christ. Yeah. Because the problem was saying, okay, well, King may have had a nefarious agenda. He may have been up to no good, but he said some things that were right. And it's for that purpose that he should be celebrated. The problem is that it creates this kind of slippery slope because King is everybody's man, as it were. What the wokesters tend to do is, well, okay, so since you want to say King, since you want to celebrate this part of King, well, what about what King said here? He also talked about redistribution of wealth. He also talks about we're coming to get our check. And so what white people tend to do is they want the sanitized version of King, but they don't want the real King, the King that, called America to account and called America to the floor. And this is what it creates, this cycle. And then white people feel guilty. And then they, it creates this whole mess that it's where it's like God, on the other hand, is not a God of confusion.
Yeah.
He came to bring a sword, but he also came to bring peace. And so it's like, we know that with Christ being a good shepherd, I can point to him as the example, point to his teachings, the things that he said, and know there's no hidden nefarious agenda to cause.
Well, and I was even going to say, almost going to ask you to wrap it up. I was like, oh, so it's like if some black kid or person or whatever, or progressive happens to stumble on this interview, and maybe they're gutted by this thing, and you're like, I'm going to like, can you talk them off the ledge? And maybe they're just discounting you like, he's an Uncle Tom guy, or whatever they do to black guys that are trying to speak truth. But I think you kind of already said it. I don't know what more you can say. I am guessing you would say to the church, the black church, guys, serve Christ. There should never have, you can honor people. God honored certain Moses and David. It's not, if a guy is a righteous man, it's good to emulate him. But if he's not,
right.
You said you want to talk about history. Well, this is history too, but I guess it would be interesting to see how people respond to this.
And by the way, Brad, not to cut you off, but like for me, that's a question. So I don't know if you know this, but I helped produce a film called Uncle Tom 2.
Oh, did you?
Yes. And I'm in a film called Uncle Tom. Uncle Tom was released
with Larry Elder.
Yes, Larry Elder's films.
Yeah.
So Uncle Tom, the original film, was released in 2020, a couple weeks after the whole George Floyd situation.
Yeah.
And because I'm in it, I was invited to tour the film, go to different states and do these live events. And after showing the film, we would be on the floor answering questions in the Q&A. And one of the questions that people would often ask, because these are conservative crowds, predominantly white, is how do we get black people to see this? How do we get, people in the inner city and black churches to see it? And my answer was always the same. I don't know. My wheelhouse is not marketing and distribution and strategy. The only thing I can do is actually do the history, do the research, answer the questions, make the film. And so I kind of took this position of not really focusing so much on getting it in front of black people. I had this idea instead of, if I'm doing the thing that I feel called to do and saying the thing that I feel called to say, I trust that it will not return to God void, that it will accomplish what it sets out to accomplish. And when I tell you that around that time, my Instagram, for example, I probably had about 8,000 people following me on Instagram. Between then and now, I think I have somewhere around 350,000 people. And many of these people are black. Like when I was looking at the demographics, the number of black men who followed my account over the past, when you look at the number of people who followed my account over the past 6 months alone, most of them were black men, right? And so when I stopped focusing on, man, I need to get this in front of black people and it's up to me to get it in front of black people, when I stopped focusing on that and focused instead on what is the assignment, what is it do I feel like God is calling me to do, and speak into this issue in not a sensational way, not and look at the philandering and the womanizing that King did, because that's not my focus, but rather what do we as a church do in light of the information that King was not somebody who profess the gospel? What do we
Yeah.
do with that information as a
Yeah.
church?
Right. Right.
To the
Well,
extent that I made that kind of this drum that I'm beating, um, it's as if God is bringing the people who need to hear it. And I have like, there's a lot of Black men and Black women for that matter, who are following the page, listening to the information. I get emails after DMs, after texts of people who are thanking me for the information. And it's all to the glory of God. And
yeah.
so this idea that, you know, a lot of Black churches are going to reject it, I think that's true, but I think that we're moving the needle, and that's important.
Well, and what I love is what I've learned it myself when I started doing comedy as a Christian, but I was just doing comedy. It's hard enough. But when God crafted my comedy into a ministry, I didn't see that coming. But I've learned that, you know, you if you if you seek the results, you'll probably fail
Mm,
because you're getting in front of God. But if you seek your calling, if
mm,
God says go here and you say okay, the results will follow you because you're in the path you belong because you're going to Nineveh finally, and
right.
so He can do some work with you. But it's hard to do. You know, we're humans and we gauge success by numbers and by money and by people telling us how great we are, because we don't know how else to assess if we're getting anywhere, for the most part, without fruit. And even the Bible speaks about we should be able to tell who somebody is by their fruit. And
Hmm.
so here we sit with this amazing documentary series about the fruit of Martin Luther King that is perhaps tainted. And man, it's weird. It still is weird,
Yeah.
but yet important. Um, how can people watch or are listening? Because I'm also on Spotify and so forth on Salem. How do they get a hold of and to so they can watch your
Yeah,
series?
you can go to chadojackson.com, all one word, chadojackson.com. And there you can find I think it's three ways currently that we have to watch it. It's on Vimeo on demand, Patreon, and good old fashioned DVDs. And it's a labor of love. We've had the privilege of Dr. Carol Swain, um, Vince Ellison, Virgil Walker, to name a few, who participated in this project, and we're glad that it's finally coming to light because it's been years in the making.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, Carol's an old friend. She's been on my show here a couple times.
Oh, nice.
And I love Carol. She actually had me speak at a couple of her events. And
Yeah, I remember you from some of those events.
oh, okay, okay.
Yeah,
Were you there? Okay, well then
yeah, you were hilarious.
Oh, thank you. I didn't know I didn't meet you, or I hope I met you. Yes, this last one was Bob Woodson. He came on my show, and then
Yeah,
we had Ben Carson, and he agreed to come on. But so far, I haven't been able to pull that together. And then Larry Elder was the year before that, and I said, Larry, will you come on? And he's really difficult to get on the show, but
yeah.
I just love his intellect and what he talks about. Well, this is an amazing journey. I really appreciate your courage. Appreciate more importantly that you're a brother in Christ and that you've decided that God's story must be told, and the integrity of being a true believer is what drives you because God can work with that. As I have told people, and what has God told me to tell people so much now in the last year, is you were never called to be a Christian. You were called to be a disciple. Christian's easy. Jesus does all the work. Disciple's the hardest thing you'll ever do in your life because it gives everything. You become a slave to Christ. You die to Christ. You are crucified with Christ. It's not a metaphor. As a matter of fact, he even said one of the proofs that you're following me is they're going to hate you because I am the truth. Well, you are a light bringer, my brother Chad, and I hope that you will come on again. We can talk more about other things. There's obviously we could keep going, but this is an amazing MLK project, and I want you people to watch it. Give and donate. These things aren't free. And, put your money where your mouth is. Don't protest by getting a sign up. Protest by putting money into other people's accounts so they can continue to follow their calling. That's what the body is supposed to do, to take care of each other in times and seasons, especially such as this. Remember, if they ever say you're being politically incorrect, I always say thank you for the compliment. Nothing greater than to be speaking truth, irrespective of what the culture thinks of you. And me, I'm just a little comedian, just a little Christian guy, happen to be white. But I am doing what I'm supposed to do, and it's very simple. I'm just putting the woke back to sleep. See you next week.